This talk is sponsored by Polygon. Polygon is the leading platform for Ethereum scaling and infrastructure development. Its growing suite of products enables developers to build scalable, user-friendly dApps with low transaction fees without ever sacrificing on security. Learn more at polygon.technology.
Hey guys, I'm Preethi Kasireddy, and this is the closing keynote for Web3 Conf. I'm super excited to be here. I've been involved in Developer DAO for a few months now and just continue to be amazed by the amount of excitement, energy, and value that the community is creating. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see where Developer DAO goes in the future. For today's talk, though, I want to focus on a specific topic related to getting more developers in the ecosystem, getting more developers into Web3. That's been an area that personally I've been focused on for the past year. And I know that Developer DAO is also focused on that. They put out a lot of resources for developers to come in and learn Web3. And it's a really welcoming community. But I want to kind of talk about what more we can do to get more developers in the space and why we need more developers as well. So with that aside, I'm going to get started. Just give me one sec. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen, and I don't really do that many Loom videos, so this is an interesting way of giving a talk, but you know, that's the world we live in today, in a digital world. So let's just get started. So who am I, right? My name is Preethi Kasireddy. I'm currently the founder of dApp Camp. So dApp Camp, what we're doing is we created a boot camp, like a coding boot camp, except it's for teaching people Web3 development. So we don't teach people how to code. We only accept existing software engineers who have demonstrated a certain caliber of technical skills. And we take those existing really strong software engineers and then we train them on Web3 development. Our course is 3 weeks long, but really I would say it's more like 6 weeks long because we do give students 3 weeks of homework beforehand and then we help them afterwards, giving them resources to do. It's kind of like 3 weeks is when we're meeting live and doing all the cool stuff. And then it's like a lifelong journey where we're with them as they're coming into Web3. So this is our website. And if you're interested in becoming a Web3 developer and you want a more like curated approach, a lot more one-on-one interactions, and you're willing to pay for that, feel free to sign up for the wait list and we'll be in touch when we open our next cohort. So with that aside, really, one of the biggest reasons I started dApp Camp was because I had previously started a crypto company. Oh, I kind of skipped my background. So previously, I had started a crypto company myself. So at the end of 2017, early 2018, I founded my own crypto startup called True Story. And basically, you could consider us a social networking app on the blockchain. And we were really trying to use token incentives to see if we can create a mechanism to curate the truth on the internet. We spent 2 years building it. It was super fun. I learned a ton. We all had a lot of fun building it. Ultimately, we realized that we felt like we were a little bit too early to market. And something like this will exist maybe, in a couple of years from now or even 5 years from now. But we felt like there's still so much core infrastructure that needed to be built in Web3 that building a social network before all of that existed felt like putting the cart before the horse. So we shut the company down in early 2020, and I've kind of been doing other stuff after that. I took a break from crypto for a while. And then when I came back into the space, one of the biggest things I felt like was missing was there was a lot of new people that were coming into the space because of things like DeFi and NFTs and stuff like that. So it brought a lot of mainstream interest into the space, but it still felt like the number of developers was lacking. Like there were so many hard problems to be solved in crypto and not enough developers solving it. It was the same people from 2017 that are still some of the that were still some of the top developers in 2020 and 2021. And I felt like that needed to change. We need to bring more developers into the space to be able to explore the problem space and figure out how can we tackle some of these like really big issues that we have. And, crypto and Web3 gets a lot of criticism, and some of it is, you can kind of just brush it off because it's clear that the person hasn't really done much research or thinking around the topic. But some of it, there's some you can actually justify, and you're like, I can see this person's point of view. And oftentimes the argument is like, just give us more time. Like, this is so early. We need more time to get to that solution. But I think we can compress the amount of time that we spend getting to the ultimate vision for Web3 if we have more developers, if we have more people and talent building in the space. That was one of the reasons I started DAppCamp. I know that when I tried to get into Ethereum development, it was really, really, really difficult. That was back in 2017. And the way I learned was I would just look through ICO projects and their smart contracts and try to see how they worked. Ethereum's documentation was kind of existent, but it wasn't that great. There was not that great tooling. Truffle existed, but really that was kind of the gist of it. Open Zeppelin existed, but compared to what exists now for a developer in Web3, there was not much. And we've made a lot of progress since then. And so I felt like this was a good time to get more mainstream developers into Web3. And that was one of the reasons I started DAppCamp. Previous to that, I was also a software engineer at Coinbase. And prior to that, I was a partner at A16Z way back in 2013 to 2015. And then before that, I worked at Goldman Sachs as an analyst. So I kind of been around the finance tech world in many different ways, as a banker, as a venture capitalist, then as a software engineer, and then as a founder. And now I'm a founder again, but mostly teaching developers. So with that aside, I truly believe that we need more developers in Web3. And there's just so much opportunity for developers in the space and to create really, really cool things. Some of the opportunities that I think exist are the obvious ones that we've probably all heard of. One of the biggest things is that with Web3 and crypto, we can kind of rebuild our entire financial system. I think 2020 taught us how weak and fragile and unstable our financial system is, and how fake is probably the right word, how fake it is, how it's really propped up by these central banks that have unlimited power to print money and kind of change rules whenever they want. And consumers are kind of at the mercy of whatever they decide to do. And crypto, really, the ethos of crypto is that we want to rebuild trust in the financial system, right? Let's create a system that's more open. Let's create a system that's more transparent. Let's create a system that allows people to transact in a way that doesn't rely on a couple people making certain big decisions. So can we create an open, decentralized global financial system is still very much an unanswered question in Web3. I would say we have some early proof of concepts that show that we can, but we don't have mainstream adoption yet. And I think developers who come into the space can really help shape that future, because they can come in and they can solve some of the hard problems, whether it's more on the protocol layer or on the UX layer. I think we need developers working all across the stack to really rebuild that financial system. The other opportunity I think that exists is we can basically try to build the internet from scratch again. And maybe not from scratch, but at least try to rebuild some of the core things to be a lot more open. And so Chris Dixon is an example of someone who's really good at kind of laying out the argument for why we need more open protocols in Web3. And I believe that he's very right. Web 1.0, as we call it, had a lot more open standards. That's how we developed various types of protocols that we use today to this day. And Web 2 suddenly kind of centralized a lot of the services and the internet that we use today. Like, when we think about the internet, like for most people, it's Google and Facebook, which is a centralized company. They're not open protocols. They're not things that other developers can build on. They're not things that provide APIs and transparency into how they're doing things. They have full control over the protocols and the systems, and hence full control of the users that use them. And so it's an opportunity for developers who are coming into the space to really rethink how we can build an internet that's more open, that's more transparent and public and fair, etc. The other big opportunity for developers is, especially if you're coming from a developing economy or a country that's authoritarian or whatever, where you might not have access to the financial infrastructure that we have in the US or any developing country. And so getting access to a permissionless financial system is a huge deal. I think a lot of people, that opens up so many opportunities for people who are in these countries who don't have access to that. Without financial access, what do you have, right? You don't have rights, basically, because if you don't have the ability to transact, you don't have the ability to actually exercise your rights as a citizen, and that diminishes you as a person, right? Like if you don't have the ability to exercise your rights, that's very disempowering. And I think crypto has the opportunity to create a permissionless digital economy that anyone can participate in and have a voice in, and have the ability to do things in and transact and et cetera, et cetera. So I think developers who might be interested in building that part of the crypto stack, there's an opportunity there as well. And overall, like the whole ethos of crypto is, how can we move power from the center to the edges, right? Right now, we're starting to see the downsides of too much centralization. That's not to say that we need to live in a completely decentralized world. I think that could also be inefficient in a lot of ways. Centralization sometimes makes things a lot more efficient. But this pendulum has swung way too far on the efficiency side, where we've kind of given up things like freedom, the ability for the individual to be empowered. And instead, we've given the power away to these centralized organizations. And I think crypto allows you as a developer to come in and make a big difference in helping the pendulum swing slightly the other way, so that we can give more power to the people and not to centralized companies who in the long run end up having skewed incentives because they're trying to keep the amount of power that they've accumulated. And the other opportunity for developers is that you get to tinker with really cutting edge technology. Like, that's one of the reasons I got into the space. When I was reading about Bitcoin, when I was reading about Ethereum back in 2015, 2016, 2017, it was like there was so few people who understood it, which is one reason that made it exciting, because I was like, what is this thing that like very few people understand, but it seems very important. Like at the time, I really couldn't figure out like why. I just had a feeling that this was going to be important, but I was like, this is something that I feel like is going to be important. I think I should spend more time on it. And the more time I spent on it, I was like, this is really cool. Like, this is so new. It's novel. It's like a blank canvas for a developer to come in and make a difference, to be able to think about innovative ways of doing things, new ideas. And right now, the market is so hyped, for better or worse, that like there's so many, if you have an idea, it's likely that you can go out and build it and get funding for it. So take advantage of that opportunity, right? Or join an existing protocol that you're really excited by and contribute to that and provide interesting ideas there. Like really, when I say crypto is a blank canvas, it truly is, even though it might feel like, you're too late to the game. I think from a technical standpoint, we maybe have covered like 5% of the ground. There's so many problems, interesting problems that developers can tackle. And like some of them, there's like no one looking at them. So you might be the first person looking at certain problems in the space. And that's exciting to me, at least to me, that's exciting. It's exciting when you can be more on the cutting edge, doing things that other people are going to catch up to you in like 5 years. So that kind of sums up some of the opportunities that I believe exist in Web3 for developers. There's challenges though, right? Obviously, I've been kind of talking about how there's not enough developers and a lot of problems. So one of the biggest challenges of Web3 is, can we get more people interested in the space? Can we get more developers? Can we get more designers? Can we get more product managers? Can we get more operations people, community managers? Can we get talent into the space to really do the things that we want to do? And especially like high quality talent, right? So that's obviously a challenge. The other interesting challenge that I'm going to spend a little bit more time on is criticisms and misunderstandings of Web3. Because I know that we face it even at DAppCamp, where developers, sometimes they come in and then, they're excited by the tech, but then they hear the news or some influencer or something say XYZ about Web3, and then they start having all these doubts, and then they get scared, and they're like, is this worth, it seems so risky, like should I risk my entire career to come into the space? So it certainly does affect how many developers come into the space when you see all of this public criticism being created about Web3. And some of it is being created by really, really reputable people. These are not like, some of it, yeah, you can just kind of ignore and shrug off because you're like, this person clearly is a troll and why would I care what he has to say? But other times there's actually really reputable people saying this criticism. And I've noticed that it does sometimes make developers take a step back and be like, maybe I should stick to Web2 until this thing is a little bit more proven out. So I do want to focus a little bit on that. And I created this open source repo, which you can see here, and anyone can contribute to it. I figured this is the best way to kind of start putting together some of the criticisms of Web3 and then putting together strong counter arguments to it. So, for example, proof of work wastes a lot of energy, right? This is a very common criticism that you will hear over and over and over and over and over again in Web3. And every developer will come ask me or our DAppCamp teachers, like, what do you think of this? Is this going to ruin the entire planet? And like, anytime someone kind of brings up that criticism, it kind of tells me that they haven't done enough research and digging. So what I did was I went in and pulled out very strong counter arguments to that criticism. For example, the fact that Bitcoin uses energy that otherwise would go to waste. And here's a source that kind of shows that is actually true. So for example, in Shenwan, like they massively overbuilt the hydroelectric power in the last decade. And a lot of Bitcoin miners actually use that hydropower to do mining. So another thing is the fact that Bitcoin mining is a net benefit for the energy sector. And here's a source that kind of explains why that is. Basically, the idea being here that with Bitcoin mining, because it's not like necessarily like a hospital or a factory that needs to be on all the time, they have the ability to do sort of a variable, they have the ability to have like a controllable load where they can dial their energy needs up and down. And so they can use more better sources of energy to actually power the mining equipment compared to other types of use cases for energy. And then, I kind of list out other counter arguments, and I'd encourage you to go through this yourself if you're interested. And please, if you find other good counter arguments, I'd love for you to make a PR or an issue that kind of adds to this, and I'll add it to the doc. And then, there's been other very strong criticism of Web3. For example, most recently, Moxie put out a really thorough blog post about how Web3 has a lot of centralized services like OpenSea. And that's a valid criticism, right? Like we have NFTs, but then we have OpenSea, which is kind of serving as the gatekeeper to these NFTs for most people. And here's a list of counter arguments that kind of show that actually, when you truly think about it, this is not actually as valid of a criticism as it seems on the surface. Because, for example, in Web 2, with Facebook, right? Like you use Facebook and the data is owned by Facebook. With OpenSea, you use OpenSea, but the data is owned by the Ethereum blockchain. So you as a user are still owning the underlying data. So the network effects still accrue to Ethereum, and they accrue to OpenSea a little bit because they have obviously users who are coming to the platform and they're able to accrue those network effects. But the data network effects still accrue to the blockchain. You still own your data. You can still port your data over, and the network effects are not necessarily accruing with OpenSea as much as it is with the public blockchain. And then, I kind of go into that argument a little bit further and explain it. So definitely take a look at that. And then the other thing is, there's going to be decentralized alternatives of OpenSea. I don't think that's a strong necessarily counter argument against what exists today, because that has yet to be seen. But I do believe they'll exist. So at least people will have a choice to use a decentralized alternative if they want to. There's other criticisms here that I've listed, like most people don't want to own their keys. This is another very common criticism that people will hear. And especially as a developer, like when you're building Web3 apps, you have to go through so much pain to do key management, signing, and all that. And like, it just makes it much harder to build a good UX for your users. And so sometimes when you're developing applications and you're having to do key management and stuff, like you might be wondering like why would users want to go through all this pain? Why do users want to sign every transaction? It sounds like a lot of work for users. And so like from a UX perspective, it might not be as good of an experience today, but I believe that will get better. But really the counter argument to this is that the option to owning your keys is a blessing for some people. Like some people live in countries or with authoritarian governments or and things like that, where not having the ability to hold your keys means they have no financial freedom. So the ability to hold your keys in a non-custodial way is very, very valuable to some people. It might not be valuable to everyone if especially they live in a country that's more free, but not everyone's like that. And then secondly, the UX sucks today, but I believe that the UX will get better over time. We're already seeing really innovative solutions get created with things like social recovery, where instead of having to maintain this key and the seed phrase, and the seed phrase really is annoying to store, people are coming up with ways to be able to recover your keys through friends and family that you give a part of the key to, and then you need 2 of 3 of those friends and family members to approve to be able to sign a transaction or regenerate a new key if you lose it and things like that. So I think even that argument, even that criticism, we can find really strong counter arguments to it. The other often argument that I'll see against, or criticism I'll see against crypto, is that it's a solution in search of a problem. And I think if you said that 5 years ago, I would have said, yeah, that's a valid criticism, because there's really not much utility. Like, people haven't proven the utility of it yet. But today, I think with everything that's happened with 2020 and more recently, things like the Ukraine-Russia situation and Canada last couple weeks ago, like, you're starting to see the importance of things like non-custodial wallets, for example, the ability to have not rely on your government for access to the financial system. That is becoming more and more obvious to people as time goes, and as these existing entrenched financial and economic and political systems, as the curtains get pulled back on them and we start to see how, bad and poorly run and misaligned the incentives are, we're really starting to see that crypto could be our way out. And I think if you asked people 5 years ago, like I said, things were not, think the economy was doing well. Like there was no 2020 back then. So it's hard to kind of conceptualize how crypto could be useful. But now we're starting to see that there is really a lot of value to it. The ability to own your keys, et cetera, and have non-custodial wallets. And going, the other argument for this is that Web 2 monopolies are a real problem. We all feel that things like Facebook, Instagram, Google, Apple, we can feel that something is wrong, like something is off. The incentives are not proper. They support the company instead of the users more. And users are kind of almost oblivious to what they're giving up to use these services. And I think as a developer, you can really come in the space and help, like I said, rebuild how we think about internet protocols and internet products and internet services so that data is accruing to the public blockchains and not to private companies. There's other criticisms that I kind of tackle in this thing, like cryptocurrencies as used for illicit activities. That's an easy one to debunk because when you actually look at the data, it's well below 1%. And in fact, cash is actually preferred method of doing illicit activity because Bitcoin is a lot more traceable and you leave a paper trail if you use Bitcoin compared to cash, and so forth. And then, I had something about NFTs because I heard this one recently about how NFTs offer no intellectual property protection. And again, a few counter arguments to that kind of show that they actually do, or they will in the future. And as NFTs evolve, we'll start to create standards around how we can create almost like readable rights on the blockchain with NFTs that exist on the blockchain, so anyone can verify that you have the right to this particular NFT. Long story short, there's a lot of criticisms in Web3, and like this is probably maybe 10% of what I've heard and seen in the space over the last 6-7 years. There's a whole list of criticisms that I had written down initially before I created this original doc. And it's just the nature of how Web3 works. Like and any new technology works, right? Like if you're going to come into the space and become a builder in Web3, you have to just acknowledge that it's a new thing and people are going to be skeptical. People are going to be scared. People don't like change generally. So they're going to find ways to fight back. But if you just spend, 3 months, 6 months, just really digging in, going deep, understanding the premise behind Web3, why it exists, I think you can come out the other end with a really strong belief that there is some value being created here. It's not just all hype and money and tokens and going to the moon and things like that. Granted, there's a lot of that, and unfortunately, that is a good thing in the sense that it does bring a lot of people and eyes to the space. But it's a bad thing in the sense that it kind of leaves a bad taste in certain people's mouth because they're like, this is all that this is about. Like it's price go up and stuff like that. But I think as a technologist, you should be looking deeper below that surface and really looking at the actual technology and figuring out what you can build there, what you can contribute there to make all of these things a reality. And there's going to be more and more criticisms that come in. And if you continue to get swayed by them, then you're not going to last that long in Web3. I really think one thing that Web3 forces you to do, as whether you're a developer or just not a developer even, is that it forces you to critically think. It forces you to understand things, go a layer deeper than what you knew before. It forces you to peel back and understand how certain systems work, how certain organizations work, how certain countries work, etc. And And only then do you gain an appreciation for Web3. Until that happens, like, you're going to continue to get swayed. So I guess the advice that I have for new developers is, there's going to be criticisms, and we should continue to tackle them one by one. And as Web3 developers, it's our job to be able to have strong debate and strong counter arguments to the arguments the criticisms that come up. But as someone new to the space, it's also your job to be able to critically think and not just read some Medium blog post or some New York Times post or some Twitter thread that posts a bunch of FUD, and they're like, oh my God, like, crypto's a scam, and this is not worth my time. Like, if you're that easily swayed, then that's not a good thing. So I'd encourage you to just, every time you hear a criticism, don't ignore it, because I think it's important in your own head to create counter arguments for it so that your belief in Web3 continues to harden. And if there's certain things where you're like, oh, fuck, like, this person said something and I don't actually have a strong counter argument to it, which has happened to me in the past. Like, there's been a few times when I was hiring for True Story and people would ask me certain things, and I was like, wow, you put me on the spot, because I didn't actually think about that criticism. That's a valid criticism. So I think it's important to look at criticism when it gets created, when people put it out, and come up with and really deeply think about what that person is trying to say, and whether you believe Web3, whether you believe you have a strong counter argument to that, basically. So I kind of rambled on for 30 minutes about the opportunities for Web3, as well as some of the challenges for Web3, specifically getting more developers and not being tripped up by all the criticisms that that get created in the space. So I'm going to just close off here with some parting thoughts. Actually, one more thing. There's one more challenge I did want to talk about, which is complacency. I think sometimes when people come into Web3 without a strong understanding of why we're doing the things we're doing, they can take shortcuts. And it's a blurry line, because at one point, and on one end, you want to ship things faster and you want to get users and you want to make a lot of money or whatever it is. But I think it's also important to think about whether that shortcut really achieves the end goal of why you're using Web3, why you're building on Web3 in the first place. So I'm trying to think of a good example, like, we've kind of, for example, as an industry, standardized on MetaMask. But I have nothing against MetaMask. I think MetaMask has done a lot for Web3, but the fact that we still don't have a better wallet that most people are using is, I think, a little bit of a factor of complacency. And as developers, I think we should be thinking about how we can kind of fix some of the shortcuts that we've taken, and how can we build better technology and not get complacent, not end back where we started with Web 2 by getting complacent, taking shortcuts, creating choke points of centralization and so forth. So I would say that's an interesting challenge that I've noticed more recently, where certain teams, in the interest of trying to get a product out as quickly as possible, they take shortcuts. And again, this is a very blurry gray line, because, like, it's important to ship fast and get feedback fast, but it's also important to not let go of the fundamental principles that Web3 offers. And I think as a developer, really think about that when you're building things, and think about, okay, I'm taking this shortcut here. Why am I taking this shortcut? And am I going to fix this shortcut once I prove and validate the market for this? And rather than, like, keeping that shortcut forever. So it's just a little point I wanted to make. So yeah, that's kind of just what I wanted to convey, that we have a lot of opportunities, a lot of challenges in Web3. And what Developer DAO is doing is super, super important. And I can't express how cool it is to see a community of just developers who are posting really interesting content, whether that's articles, blog posts, tweets, resources, help, answering questions. Like the amount of intel that you can get by joining a community like Developer DAO as a developer is off the charts. And I think Developer DAO is going to make a huge dent in bringing more developers in the space. Now I'm like, okay, how can we 10x that? How can we, you know, bring all the developers, as many developers as there are in Google, into Web3 by next year or something? Like, how can we be more ambitious and get more developers in the space? Because the more developers we have, the more innovation we have. So I want you to think about that. And if you have developer friends, how can you encourage them to want to come into the space? Or maybe one best way to do it is just to build yourself and show what you're building, show how cool it is to be shipping the things that you're shipping, and then other people will see what you're doing and be like, oh, that looks interesting. Why am I working on this boring Web 2 thing? I'm just going to do that Web 3 thing. So think about it. Think about how to get more developers in the space, how to get more of your friends in the space, and how you as a developer can also be contributing more to the development of Web3, whether that's existing protocols or new projects. Build. So just keep building, and hopefully you are enjoying while you're building as well. So that kind of concludes my talk. Hopefully it provided some value. I kind of know I've rambled here and there and covered a lot of different things. So hopefully I didn't get anyone lost. And if you have any questions, you could always reach out to me on my Twitter. I am _Preethi. I'm also part of the Developer DAO Discord. I'm an advisor, so reach out to me anytime in the Discord as well. I'd love to connect. And hopefully you have a great rest of your day.